You walk into a room and within 30 seconds, you've already registered the tension between two people who are pretending everything is fine. You've noticed the slight edge in someone's voice. You've felt the shift in the atmosphere that nobody else seems to have caught. And you carry all of that, every signal, every undercurrent, silently back to your seat. Later, someone will describe you as calm, easygoing, hard to read, and you will say nothing to correct them, because the truth that you have been quietly processing more emotional information in 1 hour than most people process in a day feels too complicated to explain. And honestly, you stopped trying to explain it a long time ago. Psychology has a name for what you are, and it's not what the people who called you cold ever imagined. If this is you, you already know the exhaustion of it. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from living at full emotional volume while the world only sees the mute button. You're not broken, you're not distant, and you are definitely not cold. You are something much more specific than that. And understanding it might be one of the most clarifying things you do today. Psychologists have studied people like you for decades, and what they found consistently challenges the assumption that emotional expressiveness equals emotional depth. In fact, the opposite is often true. Research on what's called emotional intensity, the degree to which a person experiences emotion internally, shows that high emotional intensity and low emotional expression frequently occur together. Not because the person is suppressing something pathological, but because their nervous system is wired for depth of feeling rather than breadth of display. Dr. Kazimierz Dabrowski, a psychologist whose work on emotional overexcitability has influenced decades of research, found that certain individuals experience the world through a heightened sensitivity to emotional stimuli. They don't feel more dramatically. They feel more precisely, more layers, more texture, more consequence attached to each experience. While someone else moves through a difficult conversation and feels mildly uncomfortable, you're processing the discomfort, its source, its history, its implication, and what it means about the relationship, all at the same time, all in silence. That is not coldness. That is a completely different kind of emotional architecture. But here's what most explanations miss. The gap between what you feel and what you show didn't arrive fully formed. It was built, carefully, quietly, over years. Think back. Maybe you were young, 8, 9, 10, and you expressed something big, excitement or fear or grief. And the response you got wasn't warm, it was too much. Calm down, stop being so dramatic. Why do you always make everything such a big deal? You weren't being dramatic, you were being accurate, accurately reporting the size of what was happening inside you. But the environment couldn't hold it, or didn't want to. So you learned something, not in words, in the body, in the way a child learns what's safe and what costs too much. You learned that the full size of your inner life was not welcome in the room. And so you did what intelligent, adaptive people do. You built a container. On the outside, composed, measured, fine. On the inside, everything. Psychologists call this emotional inhibition, not the absence of feeling, but the learned suppression of its expression. And research from the University of Rochester found that people who regularly inhibit emotional expression actually report significantly higher internal arousal than people who express freely. In other words, the quieter you appear, the more is often happening beneath the surface. You didn't become unfeeling. You became private. And there is an enormous difference between those two things. There's also another layer worth understanding. Research on sensory processing sensitivity, a trait that affects roughly 15 to 20% of the population, shows that these individuals have nervous systems that process emotional and sensory information more deeply than the norm. More neural pathways activated, more associations made, more context registered automatically. For these people, full emotional expression in real time is often genuinely impossible. Not because they won't, because the processing hasn't finished. By the time they've felt something completely, understood its edges, its weight, what it connects to, the moment for expression has already passed. The conversation moved on. The room moved on. They're still inside it. And from the outside, that looks like nothing. But from the inside, it is everything. Now here's where it's important to be honest with yourself, because there are two versions of this, and they look identical from the outside. The first is what we've been describing, a person whose inner life is genuinely rich and deep, whose expression is slow and deliberate, who feels profoundly and shares selectively. This is a form of emotional sophistication. It comes from depth. The second is a person who learned so early and so completely that their feelings weren't safe to show, that the containment became permanent. The feelings are still there, but so is the fear, and the two have become so entangled that this person can no longer tell where thoughtful privacy ends and protective silence begins. Ask yourself, and be willing to sit with the answer. When you hold your feelings back, does it feel like a choice, like a preference, the way you choose a quiet room over a loud one? Or does it feel like a wall you didn't build and can't quite find the door to? Because one is temperament, the other is a wound that has been kept very, very tidy. Both are understandable. Both make complete sense given what shaped them. But only one of them is truly yours to keep. If you recognize something uncomfortable just now, that's not a failure. That's awareness. And awareness is where everything begins. Here is what I want you to know clearly, regardless of which version you recognize. The depth of what you feel is not a malfunction. It is not a burden you were mistakenly handed. It is not evidence that something went wrong. It is evidence that you are paying attention to yourself, to others, to the texture of human experience, in a way that the world genuinely needs more of. The people who feel everything and show nothing are often the ones who notice when something is quietly wrong before anyone else does. They're the ones who remember exactly how someone seemed, not what they said, but how they carried themselves that day. They're the ones whose presence makes people feel strangely, deeply safe. Because being near someone who feels so much and judges so little is one of the rarest things there is. You are not a closed door. You are a room that requires a real invitation to enter. And the people who've made it inside know something the others never will. That what you keep private isn't nothing, it's everything. The gap between your inner life and your outer expression isn't a flaw in your wiring. It's the distance between the surface of the ocean and what lives beneath it. Nothing is wrong with the ocean for having depth. If this found you today, if any part of this felt less like information and more like recognition, I'd like to ask you something small. In the comments, leave one word for what you carry on the inside that the people around you rarely see. Just one word. You don't owe anyone more than that. And if you want more conversations like this one, psychology that doesn't explain you from the outside but tries to understand you from the inside, subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel is here for. The next video is for people who pull away the moment someone gets genuinely close. If that has ever been you, I think you'll want to stay.